this computer. Yay, thank you for reminding me. So our start today, I thought would be a beautiful song that maybe when we start singing it, you might get some idea of what it's about and sing along, but let's do that. I hear the voice of my grandmother's song. She said, stand in your power, women, stand in your power. Listen, 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 listen. I hear the voice of my grandmother calling me. I hear the voice of my grandmother's song. She said, give birth, give life, Jesus, give birth, give life. Listen, 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 listen. I hear the voice of my grandmother calling me. I hear the voice of my grandmother's song. She said, teach them, be wise, mothers, teach them, be wise. Listen, 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 listen. I hear the voice of my grandmother calling me. I hear the voice of my grandmother's song. She said, wake up, child, wake up, wake up. Listen, 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 listen. I hear the voice of my grandmother calling me. I hear the voice of my grandmother's song. Stand in your power, women, stand in your power, women, listen, listen, listen. I hear the voice, listen, 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 listen. Welcome everybody to our Pregnancy Wisdom Gathering. Finally has arrived and I'm very excited. So I'm just going to give you a little introduction to me because some of you know me, some of you won't. So I'm Suzanne. I am a woman who's been in the world of birth since the 1980s, about the mid to late 1980s, in the world of my own pregnancies. Back in those times, I was a great advocate for home birth. I remember having a beautiful stall on the side of the road in Birkenhead with other women all dressed up as hippies, being our birthy, home birth women self, advocating for women, advocating for the rights to birth at home, because back in those days we were about to lose that right. And so at the beginning of my journey, I remember the times when we were still trying to save the midwife. We were still trying to make it so that women had a midwife that was going to be present at their births. And I'm talking about a time where doctors were the only people that were allowed to attend births, and midwives kind of came to the background. So I'll just, where are you, Gareth? Got you muted. Just going to mute you just for a moment again. Yeah, so at that time, like we've had this big journey over a period of time. There was a lot of focus on, how are we going to have it so that women have the right to have midwives. And then in 1992, there was an amendment to the Nurses Bill, and it meant that midwives were allowed now to be lead maternity carers. And it took them a few years of merging out to be able to be there and present for women. So when I registered as a midwife in 1995, I was amidst the earlier phase of time when women could choose to have a midwife and knew that they wanted to have a midwife and trusted having a midwife as their lead maternity carer. So it's been a long journey for me in my evolution as a midwife. And in that time, I was also birthing my own babies. I was really lucky to have come from a family of women who, I don't know anyone in my family who hasn't birthed vaginally. There's no history of that. And for me, my first birth was so intuitive and so gentle and beautiful that I remember that I birthed in a tiny little annex off the side of North Shore Hospital, which in those days was the birthing annex. And the women were walking down the corridor, holding onto the rails and barely taking one step, and then breathing in pain and taking the next step. And I now wonder whether they even had pain relief on board. They were, and I remember thinking, what are they doing to these women? Like, I have to come into this world. It's my job to protect these women. And that was one of my biggest seeds on the journey that I took as a midwife. So now we're entering this, we've jumped ahead now into the 2020s, and I've been in this world for all this period of time, and boy, have I seen some change. So back in that time, we had women who would say, look, follow a good diet and get this exercise and give yourself rest and don't do too much. And they followed this advice. And I can tell you, our cesarean rates were low. Our intervention rates were low. Our induction rates were low. And we certainly weren't scanning every 5 minutes. Now, I'm not saying these things don't have places in the world of birth, but they're to use them wisely. And so the why for me, why am I here today? And why is pregnancy wisdom something that's become my big push in the world, is I'm watching our rates of intervention growing exponentially. And with that, I'm actually watching the state of women's mental health declining terribly. And so I don't know how many of you women know this fact, but the greatest cause of death for women in birth is suicide. It is the depressive mental state that we're in. And you can only ask yourself, why is this happening? And for me, I think that there's a huge part of that that's around the disempowerment of women. It's got to be. We've lost our voices. We don't have our power to say, I choose this. I want this. I'm going to look after myself this way. This is what resonates for me. And instead, we've come into this very masculine dialogue that is saying, come to me and I will care for you and I'll tell you what to do. I'll give you this lab test. I'll give you this scan. I'll give you this advice. I'll send you off to this place. And then I'll tell you what to do when things aren't going well. Basically, your births are being managed if you're not careful, if you're not standing for your rights and holding your space. And with that, when somebody's always doing to you without you having your true voice being heard, as the journey goes and the evolution starts to give you less and less place to say, hey, this is what I want. And we've got to say, midwives aren't perfect either. There's a lot of midwives out there who are in this paradigm of following a medicalized system. Women are coming through the birth experiences, possibly antenatally, thinking they're going to be honored. They're going to be listened to. They're going to be supported and advocated for. And then the day that they enter the birth field, things unravel. It's not what the woman expected. Of course, birth is a very incredible threshold that you're about to go through, and none of us know how it's going to go. And we need to be very clear about that. But the reality is that when in that field, the woman isn't worked with deeply, and she's not held in reverence in her space, she begins to question herself, and she begins to question her position in that room. And if we're not careful, her position gets put into the hands of the people attending her. And they start to tell her, we should do this, we should do that. And in the end, the birth unravels or unfolds. And for a number of women, they are not getting what they expected. They didn't get the care. They weren't listened to. They weren't given space to make decisions. And things happened that left them feeling like they'd just been hit by an emotional train, a physical truck, and a spiritual comet, just bang right through their body, through their spirit. And so our levels of trauma are rising. Our sadness of our disempowerment is rising. And that is my why. So please add in anything that you want to as we go through this, because this isn't a lecture. This is a discussion. And I want our voices to be heard. I want us to be able to share our reflections, our stories, and then look at, what we think we want, what we think we might be able to offer in a forum, so to speak, to leading forward. I've got a million ideas, but I don't want to be your boss. Like I say, I hold you in positions of power as well. I want to just cover, just while we've got this little quiet space, just some of the ways that disempowerment happens for women. Let's just start with our first trimester. Our first trimester, of course, begins on the first day of a period, so we're not pregnant yet. The second week, we're ovulating. Our third week, we won't have yet come to that space where we know that we're pregnant. We're waiting still to see if our period has arrived. Our fourth week, if our cycles are regular and 4 weekly, we begin to realize, oh, my period hasn't arrived. Well, people like me who had really, really erratic periods wouldn't know this for some weeks later, because I could sometimes have 6 to 12 week cycles. So actually my first baby took me 12 weeks to work out that I'd missed something. Yeah, it's quite common in my family. There's a lot of, well, that baby came a month later than we expected stories. So, but the thing that's really interesting about this, so we get to 4 weeks, we probably get to around about 6 weeks often before most women have an idea that they are pregnant. We're already halfway through the first trimester, and it's a really, really strong energetic space. Like, you know, this is the time you hear of women with vomiting, just nausea, and the extreme cases of hyperemesis where they're just uncontrollably vomiting to dehydration. It's the time where there's this intense exhaustion, where being able to get to work and get home is enough of a challenge without the thought of whether or not you would make a meal or do anything beyond that. Many, many women I know of walk in the door and literally collapse on the sofa, fall asleep, miss a meal, wake up the next day and try and drag themselves back into their daily life. Breasts are tender, everything's feeling sensitive. And you know what our dialogue is? Don't tell anyone, because you might miscarry, and we don't want to upset people through the miscarriage, and we don't, you know, it's horrible having to face up to this later on. So what we do from the get-go here is we have disempowered women to be supported in this really, really intense period, this first trimester. We've taken all of their power of care away from them and support, and said, no, shh, shh, in case you lose it. And then if you do, well, what? Shh, she lost it. Don't say anything. What are we doing right from that point? We are saying we as women are nowhere near as worthy and powerful in our incredible magical womb state to express to the world what it is that we are doing. And there's no way we're calling in support if no one knows we're pregnant. So that's just one of the first stages of our disempowerment in the journey. We come into pregnancy with all our previous life experience, you know, our own childhood narratives of don't speak up, you know, women do these jobs, when you're a young child that you have to do certain things. What did I write in my notes here? I said, we've got poor communication skills because we're told to not express our emotional flows as we go through the chemical changes of our bodies and the rhythm of our pregnancy and the rhythm of our cycles. You know, women are often talked down about their cycle as it is, you know, oh God, she's got a period. You still hear it all the time. Like our whole narrative of womanhood is about this disempowerment. I need to come up with another word, so I'm not saying the same thing all night. But, you know, we're carrying that, and then we carry it into our pregnancy. We're fed contraceptives from very early ages. You know, they're flooded into our bodies because you're a young woman who says, my cycles aren't regular, I've got heavy bleeding, I get pain with bleeding, all these other things. And the typical process is give her a pill. Give her a pill, that'll get rid of the problem, and send her back out. Same thing happens in early pregnancy. If you get morning sickness, give her a pill, send her back out. You know, realistically, these are our stories and we're carrying them with us. And the womb, the child in our womb is hearing that story right from the get-go. It's heard it from the inside of its grandmother's belly. In this system, what's going on with this as well is that with all these contraceptives and with all these anti-nauseas and with all these other pills that we're putting in our body, we're putting a lot of stress on our liver. And our liver's not an isolated organ. So everything that we put in our body is affecting every part of the system flow. You know, it's in our energetic space. It's in our digestive system, it's in all of our sacral chakras. It's going through us, and we are just being polluted by these toxins, polluted by these narratives, polluted by the radiations that we're living with. And the next narrative is women can do anything, so keep going. It actually translates into women can do everything. So not only when we become pregnant are we creating one of the most mystical, spiritual, powerful, energetic vibrancies that anything in this world could do, any being in this world could do, but we're also going to work for some company, signing up people doing this, selling this, traking down the corridor, doing something else for somebody else, and we get to ignore the miracle that is going on in our body. So what I'm wanting here to say is that I want to say to us as women, please can we find our space to really, really enjoy this miracle that is going to happen to us once, twice, maybe 3 times in our lives. A few people have a little bit more than that. But I would love to bring into our new narrative, our new dialogue, I'm pregnant. That means I hold a place of reverence. I am a goddess. I am a creator. I am the woman in your world who is now the most incredible of her species in your life, because I am bringing life into this world. I don't bring the soul enters itself. But boy, I create the body for it. And I'm going to house that soul in my world, in my womb. I'm going to house that soul in my world, in my life, and nourish and nurture that little being as it comes through its journey. Because the other side of the story is, as we go through these beautiful 9 months, week by week, evolving, we are taking transitional steps through the 3 sacred trimesters, each of which are distinctly different. We progress to cross the 2nd threshold. So the first threshold is we got pregnant. The 2nd threshold is the day that we start labor. And I say the day because for some women, labor is an experience of days, and that's okay. That's how it is for them. And some people, it is the experience of a day. We cross into that threshold and we go through this incredible time where we go into a place that I really enjoyed learning about when I was in Latin America. They talked in their cosmology stories about 3 places in the space of being. And one of them is the Ukupacha. And the Ukupacha is the underworld. It is a place betwixt life and death. And it's the place that the psyche goes into, our spirituality and our being dives deeply down there when we're in labor. We are neither in our walking common world that we know, nor are we dead. We're in the in-between space because we're bringing life into us. We're dying off our old self and we are rebirthing as a new being. It's a really super powerful place. And in that space, there is no space for people to chit-chat about their crochet, or to chit-chat about what the kids did last night, or to talk about how they don't like such and such. We are there to go through this incredibly spiritual journey with this amazing female releasing, surrendering every part of herself to birth herself as a new mother and to give birth to a baby as a new being entering in that moment. It is highly sacred space. She releases the baby comes up onto her skin, and she starts the next threshold then in that moment to become once again a new being, someone she's never met yet. And even if it's your 4th baby, even if it's your 2nd baby, you haven't met this woman yet. You are coming into a new space. So in that 3rd threshold that we cover, it's really important that we start looking into the matrescence, which is a relatively new term, but it's got a very distinct space. And the matrescence is that 40-day, 6-week period of replenishment, recovery, support, learning about ourselves in this new place, in this new space. So, you know, this journey now is taking us the 9-ish months of pregnancy, the 6-ish weeks to get to the end of that. And really, at the end of that 6 weeks, we're just taking our first steps out. We should be just taking our first steps out. So the journey of birth is a minimum of a year. And of course, if we're breastfeeding to the World Health Organization guidelines, we'll be breastfeeding for 2 years. So, you know, we really are talking about 2.5 years of being in this birthing space. And you know what? Many of us go straight back into it. So we spend years in this place, and we need to look after ourselves, because what you're being asked of in your body, if you don't replenish, if you don't get good rest time, I can tell you that journey is going to go with you into your 40s. You won't just recover. So there's a story out there that says at the end of 6 weeks, you're good to go. Well, let me share with you. The new information tells us that unless we take good care and good rest, our body replenishment will be in a state of deficit until we're in our 40s to 50s years of age. And guess what? Then we're about ready to go through menopause. So what's happening to women? It's a big story. Jackie, come and say something. Take my voice off the screen.
Oh, I'm loving this. I mean, my children are now 17 and 15. I experienced birth trauma. I am such a huge advocate around unmet needs, especially in our health and education system. And I wrote letters to the government with solutions and received gaslighting replies. So I'm just loving being in a space where people are like, actually, on our own we're powerful, but together we're potent. So I'm just loving it. I'm like, it's beautifully healing for me. It's been 15 years since I birthed. But just hearing that, because I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only one, because everyone else seemed like they were coping. So and they certainly looked like they were coping in the Treasures magazine. So I thought I was the only one. So this is was really healing for me to hear that I wasn't the only one, and that more and more people are actually taking action, you know, showing up, stepping up and speaking up and staying standing. So important. You know, we're going to get gaslighted to begin with, but to create change, we have to stay standing. Yeah.
Yeah. Melissa, I'd like you to invite you to share anything that's come up for you in this, or that you brought with you that you'd like to bring into our forum.
Well, I'm actually a healing birth practitioner. So I am working with women who have had birth trauma themselves. I've had birth trauma myself. And just what you were saying there about the postpartum stage, I've been through that very rushed postpartum. I'm still, 6-7 years later, I'm still trying to heal from that as well. I just wanted to add one more stat with how you said that the leading cause of death, or the leading cause of maternal death in New Zealand and around the world is suicide. But I also did an interview with ACC just recently about their new birth injury amendment bill.
Yeah.
And the lady from ACC gave me a stat, or their stats show that 80% of women who birth in New Zealand will receive a birth injury. So 80%, that's horrendous.
It is horrifying. Yeah,
it is. Straight away I thought, what the hell is going on? If 80%, they're pretty much saying that you're guaranteed to receive a birth injury here in New Zealand.
There was something I saw on Instagram, I think it was yesterday, and it was very clearly said, the thing that we know, if you walk into an institution, you are walking into a place which is a processing unit. Numbers in, numbers out. Yep. So unfortunately, it sounds so cold and disconnected, but the reality is when you go in there, there are 10 beds. and they know someone else is coming in, and they don't want you to be laboring and birthing in your own space and time. So often it's like, push the agenda, keep pushing, put that drip in, do this, do that. And we know that the more that we intervene, we're causing trauma. If we're not causing physical trauma, which often they are, you know, those things do, then, and they do, we're going to cause emotional trauma, because the woman's going to come out of her body rhythm and be slam dunked by something she cannot cope with breathing through. So, you know,
we're shoving women out of hospital, you know, as quickly as possible, because they need those beds again.
Yeah.
And all you get is, you know, thank you very much for coming. You know, here's your baby, on you go. You get a 6 week checkup with your midwife, if you're lucky, because there are a lot of women who are missing out on those regular checkups with their midwives. And then you're pretty much left to your own device. And I know for me, even at 6 weeks, I got a 5-minute meeting with the surgeon.
Right.
That was it. Pretty much, how are you? Got any questions? Okay, thank you very much. At 6 weeks, you're still in the thick of everything. You're still, you know, you're in that phase of, my God, I've got this small baby. I haven't had any sleep yet.
Yeah.
Try these catch-ups 6-7 months down the track, or even a year down the track, because that's when everything hits you as well. You know, that's, you know, we need this ongoing support for our mothers as well.
So there are obviously a few, and I mean just a few people who are doing birth trauma work for post-birth. And, you know, these women are coming from sometimes years down the track trying to deal with the trauma that they're still carrying with them. So, you know, I love that you're doing this work. And, you know, sometimes when you start doing it, we can be intimidated, go, oh, somebody else is doing it. It'll, you know, like, I'm never going to get a place in this world. But the truth is, when you're saying numbers like 80% of women, we need so many women working in the healing and bringing life back into life, and teaching and learning. And even if you've had a really rough time after your first baby, there's a lot of healing that can be done for second, third, fourth. So I really encourage women to not let that story go on and on.
But it's super important to do the healing, because otherwise then that trauma comes into those next births. Absolutely. As well. Yeah. So it's a continuum of it as well, which is really scary.
I agree.
But also important to do the healing so you can release the cord that you've got with that particular baby too, you know, because you know, I'm now working with lots of young people who then, when you look at kind of their start in life, there was a birth trauma. And if you're talking about 80%, you know, like, I'd love to look at the stats of 80% of birth trauma, and we got like 80% of youth mental crisis. I'd say it'd probably be a pretty close match, you know. And so there's absolute correlation to what, not only what the mummy goes through, but whatever that Pepe goes through too.
Becca, I'd love to hear how you're feeling about this conversation.
I am actually really loving it a lot. It's I have 2 daughters who are 10 and 9 already, and I'm 29 weeks with my first son.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. I had a big gap in between because I went through a long healing journey of my own, from past trauma, birth trauma, and childhood trauma, and kind of claiming back my power as a woman and being able to acknowledge that. So going through this birth, I chose it. I wanted it. I called in my son.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really powerful for me. But then I definitely didn't feel that I could share that sacred space with a lot of people, because it feels like it's not recognized as such, because most people just think of like the system you're just going through and getting shoved back out. And I really want it to be a sacred ceremony. That's why I'm here, because that's my intention for the birth. I'm having a home birth. I want to create that sacred space in my own home with my children and my partner. And it's really empowering to hear other women that are on this same journey and doing this mahi to be able to change the narratives for our future generations.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's a lot of statistic out there that tells us that women who choose to birth at home, at least start the journey at home, but if they birth at home, they've got a far less rate of babies needing resuscitation, women bleeding, like all of these things that happen because you walk through the door of an institution are so reduced if you stay in your home environment, in your own power, in your own place. So I really celebrate your decision to go ahead and, you know, elect to birth in your own environment with your own power. Can I ask you, what kind of practices have you been doing to prepare yourself, or what have you kind of brought into your world and that really deeply, this is my feminine divine pregnancy and I am embracing that?
Yeah, before I called my son in, I had a women's retreat where we did lots of Reiki and reflexology and yoni steaming, and I have my own yoni egg. And we did lots of womb healing with miri miri and tongapara, which is the sound healing, which I definitely intend to have during birth, which
I want to be there.
Yeah, so definitely just taking the time to rest. I haven't been working. My children are at home homeschooled. We just are taking our space and creating a sacred space with altars and cleansing and listening to the moon and following what we need to.
Beautiful. Are you like, I'm imagining you've got whānau around you, but you've got that in place? You're working with the sacred whānau?
Yeah, definitely. I have lots of people that I've been able to be blessed with that help me throughout my journey, and feel grateful to have so many people. I've did a breath work with this beautiful wahine that's been helping me on my journey, and she really helped me awaken to the fact that I was kind of hiding the sacredness of what was happening inside of me, because it's hard to share with others because you feel like they're just going to perceive you as crazy, or like it's not the common narrative, so shouldn't be talking about that.
You know, that says so much to me, because what my dream is that it will be the common narrative, that we're going to change this and we're going to go, you know, into a place where women say, when I'm pregnant, I do these beautiful ritualistic or have these sacred practices, because every trimester, as I said before, is a whole different journey on its own. And if we just kind of ignore it and try and get on with, I've got to go to work and earn money and pay this bill and do this and do that and show up at a social event and I'm tired, but I have to go. And we don't hold reverence for this awe that's going on inside our bodies, then we lose a magic that you can't reclaim. So I love hearing you saying you're doing this. This just makes my heart sing to know that you're doing this and you are sharing this with the other women who are here, because we all want to hear. We all want to hear.
Totally celebrating you, Becca. I think it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I think it's absolutely brilliant. So, wow, thank you so much for sharing. Harriet, all the way from the UK. Come on in, tell us. Where are you at?
Sorry, am I unmuted now?
Lovely. Yes, you are. I can hear you.
So my journey is just kind of starting at the moment. So I am 15 weeks pregnant with my first. Wow. So it's all very new, all very exciting. I'm kind of just educating myself on as much stuff as possible, which is obviously why I'm here as well. Yeah. And just honestly, I've never felt more connected to my body than I've ever felt in my life. And just, it's a pleasure to be here and to be listening to other people's stories and you guys' stories that have done it. And it's just wonderful, really. So I'm just learning as I'm going. And I've had so far a very positive pregnancy. I didn't have any sickness, which I was told was quite alarming, which was Odd thing to hear.
Yeah, it is.
I have a lot of people around me that potentially don't agree, because I also want a home birth. And that's what I will be going for. I have a lot of people that don't potentially think that is, well, it's not the norm. So people question me all the time on my decisions. And then I get a lot of men specifically telling me, oh, you'll never be able to do it without pain relief and all that kind of stuff, which is really empowering.
I know.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. You know, that's why I like listening to women that have done it and that are empowered through it and that have enjoyed it. My mum specifically, she said she loved all 3 pregnancies, loved all 3 births. So I have like really empowered women around me. It's almost like outer circles that tell you that it's not possible to do. So at the moment, that's the only thing that I've come up against. My midwives and doctors have all said, I'm midwife led at the moment, have all said, home birth, fantastic, go for it, feel really supported in that situation. And yeah, I'll be totally honest with you, I'm just so excited. I'm so excited to feel being a woman, and like, I'm very spiritual anyway, but like to feel it in this way is just something that it makes me want to cry, actually.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So
yeah,
I'm really happy to be here.
I'll show you this picture, which I found, I just couldn't resist snapshotting the other day, and it just says it all to me, because it's the women of the generations before you and the women of the world around you just holding space. And that's what we need to start remembering, as, you know, this is our journey of being pregnant, is calling in our women and reminding them they have a role to support us, to nourish us. When I read a book a few years back now, it was a Guatemalan woman, and it was a really powerful story about this young woman who was probably about 10 years of age when her mum, who was a curadora, and a curadora is a healer, so she would go out in the morning and collect all her fresh herbs in the 1990s. And she would get all the herbs together, and she was the local curadora for all people who were unwell in her village. And so she was still doing this in the 90s, and she was also the local midwife, and she was beginning to train her daughter to do this work as well, this mahi. And then a huge revolution occurred in Guatemala, and this young woman's life went from being a midwife to a revolutionary guerrilla fighter, and spent the rest of her life doing that. But she talked about, and she said, we won't share many of our birth histories, because obviously when the Spanish came, they just completely disrupted everything and broke down traditions. So she said they're too sacred to dare put on the table. But one of the things that they did do was, when a woman was pregnant, they assigned a very revered and knowledgeable woman, wise woman, to be her mentor through her pregnancy. And the idea was that that woman every day would come and talk to her. So if she had any little uncertainties, needed support in any way, that she was never left to try and work this out by herself. She was guided and she was shown the pathway through. And of course, you know, we're talking about people who lived in a world where they were still calling upon nature for everything. So they knew that it was super important to look after this taonga, this precious, precious gift inside them, and to look after this young woman, because she was carrying the next generation. And I love that that was there, but what has happened to our world? And so this is the narrative that you're hearing from the people who are saying to you now, oh, home birth's risky. They don't know that. They've heard it.
It comes from a place of fear, I feel. I feel like people are frightened, so they then automatically project that onto other people, don't they? So
they do. But you know, if you look at the work of Sarah Wickham, who lives in the UK, and she has she's a midwife, an amazing want to research. And she's got all the evidence out there. But, you know, Sarah's got the evidence that shows that birthing at home is the safest place. That is it. Full stop. It is the safest place. Some women will end up transferring. But you know what? Even the World Health Organization tells us around about 10 to 15% of cesareans are actually necessary. So if you're out of the hospital, you're going to reduce your chance of being one of the, now around about, for our country, around 35% of births are by cesarean climbing. In places like Latin America, it's got up to 80%, some places 90%. Well, you know who that's serving. It's the guy driving the Audi that's just done another cesarean. Yeah. So yeah, hold your power, hold your power. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's what education does for me. It means that when I am in that space, I'll be able to stand up. Well, I feel like I'm a very strong-willed woman anyway, so I will be able to stand up to that. And my partner is so supportive and is with me with my choices as well, rightly so. So yeah, I feel very supported in that sense. It's just it's the outer circle.
Yeah, and just kind of keep them where they need to be. You know, make sure your inner circle is the tight circle. And as you're going through this journey, bring a certain number of people into your space to keep them really close around you, because you want them holding hands, supporting you. You're in the middle doing your mahi. So I have 4 children. My first baby was born 5 weeks early, and I had the most amazing self-found, like I never did any antenatal classes, and I was going to have my baby in the hospital because I lived in a flat with 6 other people, and it just wasn't going to kind of work. But something kicked in that I hadn't even thought about. I didn't even think about trying to make it happen. On the day of my labor, it kicked in. We now call that hypnobirthing. That's what my experience was. I just did it naturally. And so I had this incredible experience of just quiet, gentle, peaceful birthing my first baby vaginally. And the doctor literally walked in the door of the hospital as his head was coming out. So that was, you know, all it was, because we had to have doctors back in the day. My second birth was at home, and a most amazing, empowering, incredible experience. And she was a bigger baby, she was full term, and, you know, it's just, wow, amazing. And then my third pregnancy, I found out when they thought I was 43 weeks pregnant and I was having this waiting for my home birth. And finally, my midwife had kind of said to me, please have a scan. And I got grumpy, like, I've come 43 weeks. Why are you making me have a scan now? And then found out that day there were 2 babies inside me. So,
that's so special.
Apparently, I turned so white. It wasn't funny. And within 36 hours, my body went into labor. And actually, by that stage, I was about, the pediatrician sort of said later when he had a look at, I think you're about 38, 39 weeks. So this is about that whole cycle thing in my family being out of rhythm. And also my mother she'd passed away the day that I had my last period. And so I'd been in the ambulance, I was running to the ambulance to get into the ambulance with her, and I started to bleed, and I remember running back inside and going, God, grab a pad, stick it on, get in the ambulance. So I knew to the minute that bleed had started. But the stress of losing my mother must have stopped my cycle, which was something that happened to me. And so we kind of, without scans, thought, this baby's arriving in August, and everything was measuring. And then suddenly we're going into September, and we're in the 2nd week and the 3rd week, and they arrived on the 21st, quite some time later. But I still birthed them normally. And one was breech, one was head first. And I was like, I contacted the consultant, and I said to him, you have to be there because I don't trust anybody else. And if we're going to, I didn't even have time to think about, which I really grieved later, but I could still birth at home. I wish I'd had a little bit more time. That was the only negative of finding out so late, was like, if I'd had another week, my head might have come back into a space of saying, hey, it's okay, you can birth at home. Because actually, I didn't need anything. Nobody needed to do anything or give me anything with that birth. But yeah, I mean, these are, what an experience. And I have to say, it was a bloody circus. And I was fighting for my rights in there. I remember things like, don't touch me, leave me alone. And I'm having to fight for my rights in this place. But one thing he did know about me was like, she ain't going to want me to do a cesarean for that breech. So we're going to have to do this vaginally. And he hadn't done many. Very few doctors had done very many breech births in that stage, because there'd been this big trial come out of the UK that had said breech is so dangerous, all babies in breech should be cesarean birth. And the consultant who was actually on duty that day was really well known for cesarean. So I kind of, slid past the knife and had this beautiful birth. But wow, it took a bit of a fight to have my power in that place. And I was in midwife. That's the only way I got through it, because I knew what I was facing. Yeah.
Well, it all sounds amazing. Sounds like you had a lovely time.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm so proud of myself, and I'm so proud to be able to say my babies were born, you know, vaginally, and they came straight to my arms. And there was a little bit of a moment where they got a bit titchy and they gave me a drug I didn't want, which really, I cried for months. I honestly, that disempowerment in itself really was, I was like, why did my last birth become the one that I really had to fight for, when my first birth was the one that I just did it so beautifully, and it was all back to front. But yeah, you know, these are our stories, and this is what we're trying to protect. We've all got a story, and we all carry these stories.
What's coming to me, Suzanne, is, you know, our lack of body autonomy, our lack of sovereignty, our lack of interoception, our lack of consent, our lack of, you know, this whole lack of understanding. And like I'm really honouring you, Becca, with your daughters and giving them these opportunities of ceremony. And you know, and I'm gathering, if you know you're doing ceremony and homeschooling, that there is opportunity for that embodiment practice and sovereignty and consent. And so I just see that there's, you know, yes, we need to be speaking up and standing up about this, but we also need to be getting to our young people really early and empowering them around their body and the power, you know, they have within their own body. We've just been given, you know, we've given it away for years through the patriarchy.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, you know, just that moment that you go to a GP because you've got, you know, early onset of puberty, something's going on, you're not quite sure what it is, and it's just like whammo, it's, oh, let's do a smear, let's do something invasive. You know, these poor young women who have never experienced anything like this before, let alone even heard that language. The language is violent in itself. And you know something's pretty weird when their doctor's saying, oh, look, I'll get a woman to come in and and what do they use? It's not supervise me, but they hold space. You know there's a violation that's going to go on, and you're here on your own to be there. And it's like, yeah, this is the stuff that there's no urgency. That young person could be given so much more time to consider. This is a whole situation of a procedure, and do you consent to it? Go home and think about it. Do you consent to it? Do you want this? And if you do, how would you like me to do it? You know, this is where we've got a lot of work to do. Courtney, I realise that you haven't had a chance to speak. Where are you, darling?
Hello. I've just realised that it's I'm under Gareth.
You are.
I'm not Gareth. I saw his picture at the start. It's like, no, it's me. Amazing conversation, just so interesting. And yeah, as you know, like I'm so interested in womb work and empowering women, and specifically trauma as well. And yeah, I've really been seeing like a lot of women my age like getting pregnant, and I'm kind of at that age. I'm like 20, how old am I? 28. So yeah, a lot of women I know going through pregnancy at the moment or just having babies, but I've really been aware and like noticing how, you know, there's been no connection to the womb or the body before getting pregnant, and then suddenly it's like, you know, you're thrown into pregnancy and this whole journey. And so for me, it's really like understanding what those women around me are going through, and like what I'm going to go through when I get pregnant at some point. And how we can empower each other, because it's just all the ancient wisdom's just so interesting, and we've just become so disconnected from it. So I'd really, that's why I love the work that you're doing, just like bringing that back.
And there are so many ancient wisdoms from so many cultures that we're all just trying to find now. We're in a really interesting place in the world, because it's not that we're going to choose one ancient culture and go, this is it. Like, we're going to work in the spaces that we're in and with the people who are around us, and what really sits in our own hearts really deeply and beautifully. So, you know, but what I really, really invite women to consider is let's see if we can bring something of pleasure into our weekly life. Like, we might find that it's a little bit much to ask for a daily big pleasure, but there might be a daily small pleasure.
Oh, I'm all for daily.
I agree. I just think about the bigger ceremonies, like it's probably not something that we're able to afford to have that ronga every week, or, you know, a particular more expensive, because let's look at it, some of the practices that are really beautiful have a cost to them. But there should be something you can bring in that's your sacred space every day that reminds you of the incredible work that you're doing, as well as the total connection with this new soul. That's, you know, there are different considerations around when the soul enters the womb. And so some people are on the understanding for them that the soul enters very, very early. And for some people, they say, and I remember my sister telling me this light came flying through the window after her baby was born. And she said, I saw this baby's soul into the body. And so that was at the time of birth. So, you know, I think there's a huge variation, and we're going to know ourselves more likely than anyone telling us we've got that connection. Maybe it's because she didn't call the soul in earlier, you know, it might be because I remember in my pregnancies, I don't know why, I didn't really connect with my baby's soul until the minute they were born. And it was just like, woof, my God. And the love, just like, my chest was ripped open. But it was, I remember saying at one stage in one of my pregnancies, just don't let anything happen to my live child, because I'd rather sacrifice this one for that. I was crazy thinking, but I definitely hadn't connected with the soul of the new person coming in to have had that thought. So yeah, it's so lovely to, you know, give yourself space and to touch your baby, and to use, you know, your sensory connection with your baby in every way that you can. And, you know, we hear women saying, you know, I felt my baby move from crazy 12 weeks pregnant or whatever. And I'm never going to say you're wrong, because I know that some women are feeling movements so early, particularly in subsequent pregnancies. And what an amazing experience that is for them, you know, to feel that so early. So yeah, there's time for you to really revere, this is me, this is my incredible gift, is to bring life through my body. What an amazing tonga that is in itself, which blows my mind. I'm just sitting here with my mind blowing apart thinking about the whole process. And you know, even after 3 decades of witnessing births, I've never gone to a birth and gone, oh yeah, baby's out, I'm out. Every time it's just like, wow. Every time you see those eyes open for the first time, every first breath that baby takes, and second and third and fifth, and every first time you witness the hour, the first sacred hour after birth, it's just like, wow. So yeah, it's such a addictive arena to be in. Yeah, and I feel really blessed to be able to talk to you all tonight about this. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you so much.
There are obviously many practices that, you know, you can look at in terms of how you can enjoy your pregnancy, but you know, we sort of talked about some of the obvious ones, you know, those that are a little bit more the ronga, the massage, the, you know, different naturopathic practices that are around there. But you know, there is cacao, which obviously you know quite a bit about, Courtney, and you're very welcome to share, because you've got an online cacao ceremony or gathering coming up.
Yeah, that's actually in person.
It's in person. Okay,
it's in person, yeah. But yeah, I'd like to bring some stuff online, definitely, and yeah, bringing more like around the womb and connecting cacao in that space as well, definitely. Yeah, because my work's all about bringing people home to their bodies. Yeah, bringing women home to their bodies. So yeah, definitely.
So yeah, that's a really beautiful and Latin American origin. And what about sacred water, sacred drinks, sacred substances, Becca? That do you know of any in the? Are your ancestral heritage is Maori? Would that be correct? Or Yeah.
Yeah. I have this friend group that does Agriculture fire ceremonies.
Mm-hmm.
So the ash is like a cleansing for the waters, and drinking it and using it in gardens and in Kai and stuff as well. But I think its origins is actually Egyptian.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, and isn't that lovely? So we're bringing in, you know, we don't have to say, oh, that's, I can only have that, because there was a time, I think, when we were, you know, kind of narrating amidst ourselves, you're only allowed the culture that you came from. But what I'm seeing now, and I love, is that humans of the world are saying we are souls embodied in our body, and we've got this huge kite of wisdom, this huge basket of wisdom between us, and we can take from each basket what suits us, so that the unique human gets to take her own journey through her own pregnancy and through her own matrescence. Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that. Yeah. What else did I made a few other little mindset, obviously, you know, those of you who've spoken about having your babies at home clearly have a mindset that says, I can do this. I trust myself. I will surrender. Surrendering's not easy. It's an easy word to say, but you know, it's a really deep space when we find ourselves in that moment where we want to say, I feel frightened. But you know, if you do find yourself in that journey through pregnancy or in the birthing phase, just remind yourself, there's, you know, I'm more than this, and the fear is a normal reaction, but what is it? What is it I'm frightened of? Let me see it. Let me walk past that veil, get myself through that, and move on, because fear will hold you back. So don't let that happen. Just let yourself face it, honor it, thank it for coming, thank it for showing itself to you, and be prepared to move through it at the pace that will work for you. And that's very, very important. And I think this is one of those places that if anybody ever ends up in a hospital environment, having an advocate who says, please leave the room, leave us alone, we've got some work to do in here, and then when we're ready, if we need you, we will call you. So it's an acknowledge that fits your being, and that's the important thing that comes with the you know, the power of having your own space. Obviously, the other things that are really helpful for you, there are all those things. Restful sleep is really important. Look after your body, give it space, nourishing food. And I'm just going to touch on that, but I just wanted to say the New Zealand National Guidelines for pregnancy are rubbish. Absolutely, honestly, do not follow them. They're just absolutely full of carbs, all the wrong things. Please, please, please don't. Nature gave us what we need. What is growing naturally on the planet is here for your nourishment. Put yourselves into that space. Whatever it is that you like to eat, just make sure it's safe. So obviously there's been a lot of information about certain kaimoana seafoods, certain cheeses, certain other things. But if you've got a very clear understanding this is super, super fresh, chances are it's fine. And I always remember a woman I looked after who loved sushi, and it's on the, you know, Listeria do not eat sushi list. And she thought, well, surely Japanese women eat sushi in their pregnancy. So she Googled it, and yep, sure enough, they did. She was like, okay, stuff this. I'm just going to eat sushis. But what she did was she just went into the sushi places and said, I'm pregnant. So you've got to make me the freshest of stuff. You've got to make sure that there's nothing contaminant in this. And she ate sushi the whole way through, you know, and she nourished her body. It's the same as women in the far north. When I worked up there, they were eating kina regularly, had the best iron levels in town. You know, but if that's what you like, just be super, super careful where you get it from. We've got a lot of stuff flowing into the water at the moment with drainage off the land that's contaminated, but it's an incredible food. And I wish I could just say to people, just eat it because it's so full of nourishment. So yeah, please.
I drank raw milk throughout. We're dairy farmers, so I knew where the milk was coming from. I knew the plant was clean and all the rest of it. My biggest thing, I kept thinking, well, my grandmother drank it. My mother-in-law, who's a lot older, she drank it raw. You know, raw. There was no processed foods back then. So it was all raw, proper whole foods that they were eating back then. So that's kind of where my thought was going to.
I agree.
Yeah.
I was so lucky having my babies in the late 80s and to mid 90s. The Listeria list didn't exist. We just ate everything. It was wonderful. And I do remember somebody saying to me, should you be eating soft cheese? But because nobody had ever given me a Listeria list, as far as I was concerned, you just ate everything. And did I hear of Listeria? I did. One woman had a case of Listeria. And you know what? It was out of a canned product, which is said to be safe. That was the one woman who lost her twin pregnancy back then. But nobody else in the whole time when I was young that I knew of, that were any of the birthing community that I knew of, any of the extended community that I was aware of, not one case of Listeria causing trouble in pregnancy was there. So
I saw one, and it was a premature baby, and it was KFC.
Right. Yeah, and that would be the one place if anyone was going to have trouble would be KFC. Yeah. So yeah, I think
your postpartum eating as well. It's all that whole nourishing foods as well. I've got a friend, she's Chinese, so her mother came to stay with her, and just the foods, you know, in their culture, it was custom that the mother would come and live with them for a month, and her job was literally to look after her daughter. So then her daughter could look after that baby, and it was all, you know, warm showers, warm soups, warm broths, warm just everything just to help heal that body from the inside. And it was really beautiful. It was quite hard for them to understand it because she's grown up in New Zealand. She had a Kiwi husband, so it sort of felt like the mother-in-law was encroaching on their space as new parents. But sort of looking back on it now, she was there to look after her mother, whereas a lot of people nowadays, we're so far removed from our families and our villages that we don't get that. So we, you know, I mean, I remember myself still having to run around and make my own breakfast and dinner and, you know, all the rest of it. So just the fact that she had somebody there to prepare all those foods, postpartum's a massive, massive part.
It is, and I'm really, really glad that you brought that up, Melissa, because one thing that's really come to light in the last few years is the diet we eat in pregnancy is extremely different to the diet that we need to be eating postpartum. In postpartum, because you've given up blood and a lot of energy, and I'm talking about spiritual energetic space as well as our physical energy, we can't eat certain foods that are going to be putting a lot of stress on our body and not allowing our body to replenish and get itself back into a state of well-being. So what we're finding, or what the studies are showing, is that if you go back into the standard diet too fast, then what's happening is, believe it or not, a lot of women are having their gallbladders taken out. Like that gallbladder is packing up because of the breakdown that's happened in the body with the stress of the wrong diet. Postpartum depression and anxiety is elevated on the wrong diet. So when we get the right foods, the book 40 Days was also written by a woman who was Chinese. She was American, and she talked about her first baby, and the family came in, auntie I think it was, came in and took over her house and, you know, gave her all the right foods and got her through this first 6 weeks. And she had such an amazing time, but she didn't know that this wasn't what would happen anyway. So when her second baby was born, auntie wasn't invited. And she soon realized, and it was all too late because she didn't have any structure in place, but she realized that now she was in this really spiraling down position of having 2 little ones at home and her body not being replenished. And so her energy, her physical energy, her spiritual energy, her psychological energy, everything was just way down lower than it had been in the previous experience. So it's becoming more spoken of now, how important that postpartum diet is and how specific it is. There are some people who are dedicating their whole work to that area. And so, you know, I tap into that because, you know, as a birth witch, as one of my friends said to me the other day, is you can't be doing all of the research. You've got to find the good researchers and use their studies to guide people through that journey. Yeah. Cool. Well, look, I'm really aware that we've got to just past 8 o'clock. So we said this was going to be an hour, and it is. One of the things that I would like to offer and ask, if you don't mind, is that I'd love to send out a short survey to you guys by email over the next week or so. If you wouldn't mind just filling that out for me, just to give me some direction about where we can head into in the future, what serves women, what you're hearing is serving women, because the work that I do is my life purpose, and I want to serve women in the way that works for them, not just because I thought from my perspective this is what I think you need. I'm not wanting to work that way. And so, you know, in my journey, there's going to be a lot of expansion from where I'm working. After, you know, I've decided to give up mostly the clinical practice and get into the serving the greater numbers through reaching out online, reaching out in workshops, that kind of thing. So if you don't mind, I'd love to do that. So that'll come into your email box in the next week or so. And I just wanted to read you a beautiful poem, very short, that I got sent the other day by a beautiful young woman. And this is it. She said, "The making of mankind, two souls born of the same dust, miracles of consciousness, the entire universe falling in love with itself over and over again." That was a twin who wrote that. So she talked about the two souls because it's the twin, but I just thought that was beautiful. Thank you so much for coming, for sharing your stories, for being brave, stepping into a sacred space that is still very, very intimidating for many people, for being brave and saying, I am going to birth my baby where I want to, and I'm holding my power. And I hope that we get a chance to talk again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Night, night,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.